pummeled. So let's get started. So today we're going to review what Bridget had started. If you're able to watch the January 2nd webinar or join us live, we're going to engage into some active conversation about what we are getting from that in our own schools. So we're going to, I don't think too many introductions are needed since we all know each other. But if anyone would like to do anything special to introduce yourselves, we had a couple new attendees at the previous webinars. Okay, enough about introduction. So we're going to do a prayerful poem, if you will. So Kristen Melly has shared with me a poem to share with you all, two poems actually, to be reflective and to think about what we're trying to accomplish today. So if you'll join me, I'm going to turn off my video, but if you'll just follow along. Listening. Repeatedly we are given chance after chance to stop and listen to all that is fundamental. We are offered the chance to hear the waves of God's voice. But how do we listen? It is so simple and so hard, so obvious to begin and so elusive to maintain. The key to keep beginning over and over, to keep emptying and opening, and simply to keep listening. For to listen is to continually give up all expectation and to give out attention completely and freshly to what lies before us, not really knowing what we will hear or what that will mean. To listen is to lean in softly with a willingness to be changed by what we hear. Repeatedly, we are given chance after chance to hear the waves of God's voice. This is from The Exquisite Risk by Mark Nepo. And related to that is teach me to listen. Teach me to listen, O God, to those nearest to me, my family, my friends, my co-workers. Help me to be aware that no matter what words I hear, the message is, accept the person I am, listen to me. Teach me to listen, my caring God, to those far from me, to the whisper of the hopeless, the plea of the forgotten, the cry of the anguished. Teach me to listen, O God, my mother, to myself. Help me to be less afraid to trust the voice inside, in the deepest part of me. Teach me to listen, Holy Spirit, for your voice, in busyness and in boredom, in certainty and in doubt, in noise and in silence. Teach me, Lord, to listen. Amen. Adapted by John Beltry, Jesuit. Thank you for following along. So we learned from Bridget last time that there are four main questions that we really should think about. When we're looking at assessment results, how do these results help us to plan for instruction? How do we message them to parents? How do we show student growth? And how do we help students set goals to get to their next level? All these measures will help us to move forward. So how are we making sure this is happening? So we have to remember also what is meant by language proficiency. Functional language ability, what someone can do in the language. It's unrehearsed and is not an achievement test. And the ACTFL levels are very useful here. Several of you I know are using these levels or are aware of them. I think it's a very important tool, graphic, to have handy. Bridget was sharing how in Washington State, for children to graduate high school with the seal of biliteracy on their diplomas, they have to test at least at the advanced mid-level. And knowing what that means concretely is very important. And so for their students in Tacoma, that is their goal. So they are working backwards so the children will reach that goal in a timely fashion. She went over the STAMP and APPLE tests. The APPLE test, of course, is the ACTFL test that is produced by the Language Testing International Division. That's all ACTFL. It's using those inverted cone levels. So what tests are you using in your schools? And what are you thinking about for next year? Just to talk about assessment to get us started. Matt, do you want to share what is happening in Wisconsin?
Well, actually, so right now we're in the process of doing the access testing. So it's actually been going on right now. I mean, over the last week here since we've been back, but also before break, and I think should be finishing up with. I think we have till like the first week in February to get it done. So I'm not personally like all that familiar with the test itself, but that's what we're doing right now.
I remember either Itzel or somebody mentioning that that was happening, so that's why I put you on the spot.
Oh, no, that's fine. Yeah,
But
I don't know that I have much more to add on it, but we are in the process of doing it right now.
right, that's a big part of what's happening at Notre Dame right now.
Do you do the access in Spanish and English or only in English?
Only in English.
Okay, because we do the ELL access too, because that's what our public schools are using, but it's only in English.
That's why we do. That's for us as well.
To keep you aligned.
Yep.
Yes.
So in San Antonio, you don't have the same dynamics, I don't believe.
We take the Iowa. We take that in March, and it might be aligned with the public school, but it is not the public school test.
But that isn't a language proficiency test, isn't it? Isn't that an academic test?
Academic, yes.
But it's a big part of your testing package.
Right.
I was going to ask Matt, have you seen the can-do statements for the ELL access or the WIDA?
I haven't, no.
Okay, because I had sent a copy to Mary. Did you get them, Mary?
I got them. Yes, I got them. I just haven't had a chance to get them out. I'm sorry. But
Okay.
It was discussed during the webinar, and several people had referenced it also.
So that's a good thing to have the can-do statements, and the can-do statements are in both English and Spanish.
Okay.
So they are similar to what the levels, I mean, you can move them from the kids from one level to the next, and you can see what kind of language do you have to stimulate in the classroom in order to move them to the next level.
Okay. And that's why Bridget wrote this, what someone can do in the language. She was sort of echoing that sentiment in her commentary.
Great.
It is important to think about those and make them if you're going to use the access test. Mariela, what are your thoughts on testing in your different hats as a mentor and as a researcher?
Yes, and so, I mean, I was excited to hear the first webinar back on the second to hear what was shared with us. And remember, I asked the question about, well, what was the funding to be able to get those tests set, given that the, Archdiocese wasn't assisting that school either, and how they were they were charging students then upfront, I guess, with part of their funds from the school. And so I think too that when it comes to language proficiency, it's important for also the teachers to be involved with our local testing, especially on the campus, as the teachers not only being aware of the scope and sequence that's being covered, but also teacher goals for student language proficiency.
Yes, and that's something that we're going to be talking about in a couple of slides, actually. What are your goals for the students? What are your goals for the year? How are you going to get there?
Cool.
I think that's an excellent point. Other thoughts on this before we move forward? Okay. So related to what Mariela just said, this backwards design. This is something that Bridget was emphasizing from their own experience. And I think we all do this as educators to a certain degree, but it's good to say it out loud and remind each other that backwards design can be very, very beneficial for vertical planning and horizontal planning, multi-year planning. And also related to that is to keep in mind that the literacy goals might be different from the speaking goals. Developmentally, again, as educators, we know this, that the children will be speaking and listening before they're reading and writing. But I think sometimes the way and this is my own commentary, what our expectations are in a bilingual program or of bilingual learners is sometimes not reasonable. That speaking will come perhaps before the writing part, maybe not, but it may not progress at the same rate. Thoughts on that before I move to the next slide?
I agree that we need to be monitoring all four of the aspects, the speaking, the listening, the reading, and the writing. They all have to be monitored as we're going forward. And often the listening is a very hard one to monitor because it's more passive.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, some of these are very obvious, like writing, or even reading to a certain extent. Listening is different. What are they taking in and what are they thinking about? Especially when they're little.
And I know too, we are really interested in finding out more when the kids score at a very different rate in their home language versus their second language. But if they are like low in both English and Spanish when we test them, does that indicate that maybe they have special education needs because we're seeing holes in their whole language development? Or does it tell us something different? And so it's really, sometimes it's hard to manage all the data we have to look at in order to see how the kids are coming along with their language skills.
Right, and which is going to take priority. I have a friend who teaches at a small Catholic school in Central Mass. She is both the special education director and the bilingual director. It's a very small school. And she goes, sometimes, Mary, those are very difficult things to decide which needs to come first, because is the child's learning issues related to the fact that he or she is trying to learn two languages at the same time? Or is which do I need to address first, or can I address both? It's tricky. It's very difficult, and you only have limited funds and limited time and limited people. Often it's her, 'cause she's bilingual and the special educator. It's tricky. It's very difficult. Let's move to the goals then, because we're kind of referencing them. This is the chart that Bridget adapted from the Utah dual language guidance. Utah has a very well-established, well-developed dual language
Both are from
curriculum. And looking at these four aspects of literacy that Liz was talking about, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, this is what Holy Rosary in Tacoma is hoping to achieve with their children starting in first grade. This is related to those ACT-FL levels in the inverted comb. So what do you think of these? How might they be useful for your schools? Perhaps they're not. We had a bit of a debate in the previous webinar what these levels would mean if you're not using the Apple test. It's a fair critique. So I open this up to you. Any thoughts or questions about these goals and how they might relate to your work?
I think it's helpful for myself, and I could share this with the teachers and actually have something concrete to work with them on. Whether or not, I don't know if our first grade I would consider novice, middle, or not. I think reality is for us, those levels might need to be adjusted, but at least it's a goal.
Something concrete. I'll say one thing, and then Mariela, I think you have something to share. One of the teachers in the previous webinar said she would like this posted, make it really big, and post it on the wall so that the teachers see it, the students see it, the parents see it, everyone has the same set of goals. So Mariela?
Yeah, well, I was thinking, so agreeing with Carol there, it's also a way to maybe just divide each of the areas that maybe students could be novice to high in listening, but yet novice in speaking, and then novice in reading, and then moving forward. So that maybe that we see the boxes there in front of us, that maybe they could also be color coded in the sense that as students move from level to level, the teacher could see their growth.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, to make it very visual and very obvious what you mean in terms of progression. Like, how are they progressing by grade?
I think it could also maybe help parents a little bit just with kind of feeling comfortable about where their kids are at. So I know a lot of times, like if your child is not like at exact grade level in English reading at this point, it can be worrisome to kind of see this chart, and that progression can kind of contextualize some things maybe to just make people feel a little bit better about the long-term plan.
Reassure them that
Yeah.
it's not all done just because junior's not at grade level right now. That
Yeah.
there are many ways in which he might be progressing,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a little bit more in speaking and listening than reading and writing, or vice versa. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And this is good for both languages, right? Carol,
Yeah.
did you want to add? I saw you put your hand up earlier, and then we'll jump to Liz.
I was just thinking it would be good to have one of these charts for each student, have their name on top and like you were talking about color coding where they are, Mariela, and for the teacher to share that with the student as well as the parent. I think that if I was a student, I would want to advance to the next level. And so seeing where I am, it would give me an incentive to move forward.
Right. There's some internal motivation that can come from seeing what the next steps are.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Liz, did you have something?
What I was going to say, one of the problems that we have here in Minnesota is we will take the English proficiency test in February, but we don't get the results until August. And so I can give it to the teachers, at the beginning of the school year, they can see how the returning kids did, and you can kind of make a plan for that. But because and that's the state controls when the test scores are released. And so it doesn't really help the teachers in the year that they are, like, we take it mid-year, but it doesn't help them for the rest of the year to see if their kids are moving or not.
I had the same problem when I was teaching in Abilene at a parochial school, that the test was given in like October. We wouldn't get, because of the way things worked out, we didn't get the results till July. And at that point, it was completely useless and a moot point. And because the kids are gone, and then we start over again. It was very frustrating for everyone involved, the principal as well, because she couldn't get them to give it to us any faster, unfortunately. So I hear your frustration. It's very aggravating.
And I guess that's where the can-do statements for the WIDA test, where we find them a little bit more helpful, because we can use it kind of as a formative assessment. Can you see the kids doing this in your classroom? Then you think that this is where they are. And then we just use the test to kind of verify, but it's also the test that we have to take in order to get Title III funding. So it's very important that our kids take the test.
No, sometimes that is tied to funding, isn't it? And that's a whole nother discussion. But it's good to use the test as a way to verify. I like how you put that. It's good. It's not the only way we're measuring progression.
Yeah. And the other thing, I think it would be great for the upper level teachers to be able to talk, if we ever, get the network really strong, because I know the further up you go, the harder it is to move a level, because the language has to be so much more complex. And so trying to share ideas, we're working right now on having the kids do more academic language and talking about things across the board, to really encourage them to talk to a neighbor, even if it's just turn and talk for a couple minutes, so that they're using that academic language all the time, even if it's 10, 15 minutes a day in the classroom.
Right. And if I may, that point about moving up a level, and that's why you have fewer sub-levels on this inverted cone, because there is less room for growth. Once you hit advanced high, it's harder to move up. And Bridget added, and as you might have heard if you watched the recording or attended, the distinguished was added later, this distinguished level, that there are fewer opportunities to move once you hit a certain point. And so it does get harder. And you see the space, it's not a perfect graphic, but I think it's very useful, and it describes, makes a picture of what you're describing this, that it is harder to move up for lots of different reasons. Okay, so we have the goals. Part of having those goals, though, is also to explain this to our students' families. And Bridget shared the letter that they use in Tacoma, explaining the test, explaining what proficiency means. In that letter, they showed both student results and class results, so the parent or the person reading can see where their child is compared to his or her peers, and just give some concrete steps for moving forward. So, what are your thoughts on that? What are some ways that you communicate with the students' families? And how do you explain or inform the families about the TWI program testing? What is a little bit different? This type of instruction is different. So how do you share this information with the families? Carol, do you want to start?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think that we do a very good job of it. I've done it at the beginning of the year orientation with the parents and talked to them about some of the results of the testing. But I think definitely we could do a better job.
Is it is the issue having the time to reach out, or is it the parents not being receptive? What do you think?
For us, it's the testing. Okay, as Nadiella was saying, you know, where do we get the funding for these tests? Right now, we do the Woodcock-Munoz, and that's just in the lower grades, and we're getting the results back from that, and we share that with the parents. But I'm not really satisfied with the Woodcock, and so I am in need of getting some other assessment tool. And I was going to ask Liz again, what was the name of the one that's the Can-Do?
It's the actual test is WIDA, WIDA. It's out of Wisconsin, but it's known as the ELL Access for the public schools. They refer to it as ELL Access, ACCESS.
And that's the one we use?
That's the one we use. And we got a grant. We were lucky enough to get a grant to switch over to that test. And because it's the one that the public school uses, then I can do it once a year to monitor progress. With title funds, they have to okay the test because it's part of it. It's the same that the public schools take. So we get Title III funding, and that pays for the ELL access from year to year for the kids who are continuing.
Is your grant a grant that anyone can apply for? Or is it just for Minnesota?
It was a one-time grant from our archdiocese kind of went defunct, and so we have this Catholic School Center of Excellence, which is trying to help the Catholic schools get what they need. And it was a one-time grant that they helped us write with a funder that's specific to the Minneapolis area.
Thank you.
We have used something called the Lost Language Acquisition System, but again, it's English only, as far as I know. And that was so much per test. But we still use what's the pre-LOS, which is the kindergarten level, so that we can qualify our students. But then once they qualify, we can stay in the Title III funding cycle.
And that's not required by your LEA, but it provides information that they're looking for, right, Liz?
You have to qualify the students for the LEA, and then they want yearly testing to monitor how they're doing, how their programs are doing. So we could choose which test we wanted to go with, but by going to the ELL access, the kids who come in new to this the new to our school who have been in the public system and have a WIDA score,
Yes.
I can use the WIDA score from the year before, and they then qualify to receive Title III monies.
Yeah, that is a real benefit of WIDA. It's got its pros and cons, but it's consistent in theory between districts and schools. We have access testing in the town I live in Central Mass. It's a really small town with less than 1% ELL. So they're learning all these things new, and I don't know how well it's going necessarily, but I have a few thoughts on that. They have not listened, but that's okay. It's new. It's all new for them. And then culturally and linguistically, it's all very new. And so it's good to at least start with these common programs so you can compare.
Yeah, the one thing with the WIDA, because so much of it is done on the computer, is we don't have problems with the inter-rater reliability.
Yes, that is very helpful. It's consistent that way.
With the lost test, we had to, the Archdiocese had to train our own testers to come in and test the kids, and it changed from year to year, and the inter-rater reliability was not good. So then you don't have good data coming, you know, you're not testing them correctly, so you've got bad data coming out, and it doesn't help you.
Right, and how do you communicate that to parents? Do you communicate that? I mean, they don't want to necessarily hear about inter-rater reliability unless it's like me. You have like a very wonky person who's very excited at parent-teacher conferences.
Yeah.
What do you do with this kind of challenge of bad data, good data? It's difficult. I don't know that there's a straightforward answer in this.
Right. Again, because we get the data so late, we get it in August. I asked the teachers to go through a little bit of it in October when we have our first parent-teacher conferences. But it's one piece. They get 15 minutes. It's one piece about their language proficiency, and they want to go through the reading tests and the math tests and kind of tell them what their behavior is like. So it does get kind of rushed. But with the WIDA test, it does have a graph on it, and our parents seem to understand the graph pretty well.
That's good.
So that was more helpful. But again, it's only about English proficiency. We don't take a Spanish proficiency test.
Right. No,
so Mary,
yes.
Talking about Spanish proficiency test,
yes.
Is there any recommendation from Quinn?
I'm not going to give you a personal recommendation necessarily. The description of the Apple test and the STAMP test, I think, are things that should be considered. NCEA just sent out an email, I believe it was last week, promoting or announcing is a better word, their connection with Renaissance Learning in the STAR 360 test. Did you receive that email as well?
No.
Okay. I'll try to see if I can find a copy of it. So when I was working in the public schools in Central Mass, the STAR 360 test was one that we used, and I really liked it for my own children and also for the work I was doing for that school. It's got pros and cons too, and there's a cost factor. But they do have it in Spanish as well. Whether it's going to be as good a measure of language acquisition in both languages, I'm not prepared to say that necessarily. But it is another option. Spanish acquisition test, and it's even more of a challenge for our Mandarin community. Fewer options there. But there are many tests, and I think the best thing is to kind of go through the demos. There is a demo for the test that Bridget recommended on January 2nd. So you can go through and try those out and see if they would fit your school's needs. There's a logistic aspect, like would you have enough computers? Would you have enough time in the day to do the test properly? So these are things to be thinking about. The STAR 360 test can be done over many days in small portions, but then the kid is testing all the time. So what is best? It's hard, it's debatable. And then how do you communicate all this stuff to parents? So For some of our schools in the Twin Network, the parents may or may not have the time or language proficiency in English, so it has to be translated into their home language. To be fair, do we have the resources to do that? Would your test that you choose provide you with verbiage in other languages so you can communicate to this to parents? It's something to consider and think about. The STAR 360 test does do that, but again, it's not truly a language proficiency test per se. There's no perfect test. Thoughts on that before we move forward? So, and please excuse my typo. So, knowing that there's no perfect test, knowing that we have to look at the 4 aspects of literacy: reading, writing, speaking, listening. How do we plan for this? So Holy Rosary shared their plan. They're going to look at reading and writing in 3rd through 5th grade. They're looking at speaking and listening in 1st through 5th grade. So they're splitting it up. What is your plan at your school for assessment? What factors do you consider when planning? And how might you change this going forward based on your school's needs or growth or shifts in your demographics? Liz, do you want to speak to this?
Well, I was going to say, I don't necessarily have an assessment plan with the literacy for Spanish right now going forward, but we have been working with our standardized testing situation. So we use the Northwest Educational, it's NWEA assessment, something, the measures of academic progress. And this year we were able to take the math portion in Spanish in 2nd and 3rd grade. And when we worked with the Center for Applied Linguistics last year, we came up with a plan for when we are teaching which subject in each grade level. So math is taught in Spanish in kindergarten, 2nd, 4th, and then social studies and science is taught in English in those grades, and then they switches for the other one. And so with the NWEA, we've been able to put in now a standardized test in Spanish in the math area, so that we're starting to get some results from that. And it was very heartening that our cohort, that is the first cohort that was in 3rd grade, they had the strongest results of anybody in 3rd grade taking the math test, how many kids were proficient. And it was the first year they could take it in their native language. So we were really excited about that. We're just starting now to do the winter testing to see how they're moving forward. But we also use a test for the K2s, which is called the Children's Progress Academic Assessment, which is out of also out of NWEA.
And you talked about that when you registered. You wondered if others were using it.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that, it's a real quick, like 20-minute test. You can do reading and math in both English and Spanish. And so that's where some of our results are coming in, that if we see, oh, this is a native Spanish speaker at home and they have really low English skills, if their math and reading skills in Spanish are really high and their English scores are much lower, we have a guess that it's probably the language hasn't come up to what they really know. They can't express what they really know. But when we have a kid who is low in both English and Spanish, and in this, in the same kind of areas, then we think, well, this child doesn't really understand this concept. And then we work more on reteaching that, or that's some data we can use if we think we need to go towards special education services. So the CPAA, or the Children's Progress Academic Assessment, because it's in both languages with the young kids, has been very helpful as points to help us figure out what's going on with the kid. But it's not a language proficiency test. It's an academic test.
It's like a point in time academic test.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're using multiple tests for different purposes, and you're
Yes.
trying to align that with your academic plan of when certain subjects are taught in which language.
Correct.
It makes sense. Makes sense. Other thoughts?
Well, I think that, we've had some really good discussions about possible assessments that might also be a fit for our local school. And I think it would be that being able to present to the teachers some of these examples and have them help determine which might be the most appropriate for the students. At least that's what I would think for our next move.
No, that makes sense. So it's tailored for the needs of those children. Yeah. So something to think about, something to perhaps make as a goal for next school year. We're going to have an assessment plan that's aligned with our academic plan, and here's why. And that's something that can be communicated to parents too, that there's a purpose for all this testing. That's something that as a parent and as an auntie, I would love to see. This is what, as an educator, I understand it, but if I didn't have that background, it would just feel like testing all the time for the sake of testing. So what is this testing going to give us? And what do we hope to gain out of it? So Bridget also wanted to make sure we talked about what things we could do in the classroom to support these assessments. And she suggested these pair conversation opportunities, free writing, free reading. What else would you add? These are just a sample. She tends to work with older language learners as well, so micro conversations and speed dating to develop speaking. But what do you do that works very well for doing instructional activities to help support the children when they come to an assessment situation? In other webinars, they've talked about integrating music into the curriculum, some singing, especially the younger children, lots of singing, acting out, interactive activities.
I do know for our reading and math, we have with the technology, we use an IXL program for math where the kids can practice at their level, and it comes in both English and Spanish. So when they're in the Spanish classroom, they listen to the information in Spanish, and when they're in the English classroom, it's the same kind of modality, but they listen to it in English. And we also have like RAS Kids, which is it's something A to Z. I'm trying to think of its
Learning A to Z?
literature. Well, I'm sorry, what is it?
Learning A to Z?
Maybe it's Learning A to Z, but RAS Kids has a lot of little books on it, again in English and Spanish. And what's neat is that it highlights the word when it's being read to them in the language that they're doing. So that extra practice, and because it's on the because it's based on technology, the kids really like to spend time on it.
Well, and I found with my own children when they use IXL or RAS Kids or there are a number of them, right?
Right.
They're doing the different academic activities, but they're also getting the computer practice. So one thing that happened at their school, the testing all shifted to computer-based testing, but the children didn't necessarily have the computer skills. Like they weren't used to typing. They weren't used to selecting things with the mouse. They could use the arrows because they use that for like a game, like the arrow keys, but it was so practicing those computer skills, the hardware skills of computing, was also a side benefit from using these free programs. So something to think about, something to consider. Anything we haven't chatted about that you want to be sure to mention? And I will be sending out those WIDA links, Liz. I'm sorry, today was just...
No, that's all right. I just wanted to make sure that I had sent the.
You did. You did. You didn't just think that you did. I did that today too. I was like not arguing with someone. I'm like, I'm sure I did. She's Mary, you didn't. You didn't. It's in your outbox. Is sitting there waiting for you to click send. You didn't do it. But you did send them, and I do appreciate them.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a few housekeeping items. So as you know, the Summer Academy is coming in June. Sunday, June 24th through Thursday, June 28th. We've been mentioning this at many of the webinars at the Babson College Executive Conference Center in Wellesley. That's just down the road. It's very close by, and it's a great facility. You're going to really enjoy it. We were just there on Friday. Beautiful facility, excellent food, great resources. You're going to love it. The registration materials will be sent out in February. So be on the lookout for those. So you can start thinking about your teams and title dollars. And Liz has been working on this already.
Yes.
Jump through more hoops. And we keep.
I think we got all the information in now that they needed.
Good, because I don't have any more to give her. So not right now. But let us know if you do need additional information. But so save those dates and start thinking about it more concretely. We have a lot of excellent things planned. We're making lots of details, and it's exciting. And you know, Kristen's always thinking about 100 different like creative things. So I'm trying to rein her in, and but it'll be lots of fun. It'll be very, very good. And she's so creative. It's amazing. So that's happening. And then the book club. We are going to bring it back. I've gotten many good suggestions. I just wanted to let you know we've narrowed it down a little bit. We're going to make the final announcement at our next webinar. But just so you know, this book, Teaching for Biliteracy by Beeman and Nero, was recommended. You might be familiar with it.
We've used that before in PLCs. It's a good book.
Yes, and I think you may have, that was one of the factors. We don't want to send you on a crazy publishing nightmare of $1,000 book because
Yeah.
So hopefully you have this on hand is the thought. So if you would look, please, see if you have a copy, that would be great to know. But it's got good information about bridging activities, about the complexities of language. So one example that they mentioned was Spanish is not just Spanish, just like English is not just English. So a child from, say, I think the example they used was Chile versus a child from Puerto Rico. The vocabulary might be slightly different. What can we learn from both children? What can we add to the richness of our instruction? So a very concrete, useful book, Liz Howard recommended. And then Rethinking Bilingual
What
Education.
was the title of the book?
Thinking for Biliteracy. I'll be sending out an email. So this is just to let you know. You may have a copy in your professional library.
And it's by who?
Beeman, does this come through to you all right? It looks backwards to me. Is it backwards for you?
No, it's right.
Thank you.
Is it on there?
Beeman
see
and
it.
you wrote. I'll send an email. I'll
Okay,
send
I
it
don't see it on here. I don't see it.
on the camera.
Yeah, I don't see it.
I'm holding up the book.
I don't see you.
Right. I don't see you either.
You don't see me? Do you see me now?
No.
Oh, how strange.
How do I get you?
I'm here.
I see Matt on
That's
my
good.
screen.
I see
I
I
Matt.
see you. I see.
You see
I
her?
see you, Mary.
Thank
I
you.
do.
I'm not crazy.
That is so funny.
There you are. I clicked the little arrow. Now I don't see
Oh.
Liz. Okay. Okay.
So that moves so we'll do the scan. Okay. Thank you, Matt. So this is the book,
Okay.
Beeman
Alright.
and Nero.
Okay.
That's how I say it in my Ohio twang. I'm sure there's another one.
Okay.
And it's totally a twang. And it's a small book,
Mm-hmm.
paperback. You may have a copy. So I will be sending an email, but see if you have a copy. That would be helpful to know. And then Rethinking Bilingual Education. These are a series of essays about bilingual education in many languages. And I will be probably sending these as PDFs. But just to get us thinking about things in different ways. They're very short. One was 3 pages long. I promise it's not taxing. So you don't have to buy this book. It's a bigger book. do not buy this book unless you're really compelled. I didn't buy it. I got it from the library. So don't buy it. But it's very interesting and really thought-provoking. So that will be coming as a PDF. So that is our plan for our book club. We'll keep everybody reading. And if you have other suggestions, please send them. We're always open to new ideas for books and resources. But just to let you know that that is coming. Okay?
Okay. I just wanted to mention,
Please.
Mary, that I talked to St. Anthony in Des Moines today.
Did you know?
Yes, and they're thinking about applying to become a Twin CS school.
Well,
So
they did apply already. So hopefully I have their application up.
oh, okay.
But that's wonderful that they reached out to you. That's good. We've been telling them about you. And also you guys up in Milwaukee, you guys would be their closest neighbors at the moment. And that is a school that has had some bilingual education already, different approaches. So it should be good. We're excited. I'm excited for more Midwestern schools to join. So
Yeah.
our Central time zone discussions will be even richer. So and if there was a fantastic, this will affect all of you. There was a fantastic New York Times series about a year to 18 months ago about traveling up I-35 from South Texas all the way up through the heart of the Midwest, all the way up. And the immense diversity and demographic shift that was happening along I-35. The author's name was Cave, C-A-V-E, and it was a photo journalism kind of like travel log of going north on I-35 and how this is just so symbolic of change happening across the country, linguistically, diversity, culturally, I mean. Economically, because the jobs are shifting. You don't need as many people to work in the meat packed plants of, say, Omaha, or the change of big warehouses now popping up for things like Amazon. So it's really interesting. So when we see schools are popping up in places like Des Moines, it's interesting to think about it that way. So something, because you don't have enough to read. I'll just give you more. But Damien Cave is the author of that. So in your chat box, you'll see the chat from our friends earlier. But I'm sending you a link now. I've given it twice now. That is the Google form for giving your feedback. I'd really appreciate it if you would share your feedback if you have the time.